What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about something called Kebabnorsk, which translates to kebab Norwegian. So today, I just want to learn about what this means or what this is. I want to check out this video that's going to explain what Kebabnorsk is. The description here says that in Oslo, a new form of Norwegian is emerging, which really caught my attention. It's a bit confusing for me as an American, because Norwegian language is a bit different. Like, you guys have different dialects. Maybe Kebabnorsk is a new dialect or a new form of Norwegian. Like you guys have Bokmål and Nynorsk. Maybe this is like a new way of speaking Norwegian, but this is only in Oslo? I don't know. I'm a bit confused about it, but I'm really interested to learn about what Kebabnorsk is. So let's take a look.
Norwegian is the main language spoken in Norway. Called norsk in Norwegian, there are many different types of the Norwegian language that are spoken there.
Sure.
And one type is called Kebabnorsk, or translating in English to kebab Norwegian.
Okay.
A type of Norwegian that I came into contact with when I lived there last year during my time in Oslo.
Okay.
But what is Kebabnorsk? Can you eat it? Can you speak it? Where does it come from? Well, let's find out more.
I've never heard of this before. It has the word kebab in it. In America, that's something that you eat. Like, it's meat on a stick, like a kebab. But this must mean something else. So, yeah, what is this?
The term Kebabnorsk, as you can probably guess, is a mixture of the word kebab and the word Norwegian, and it's actually borrowed from a similar term from Swedish, kebab svensk, which means kebab Swedish.
Oh.
This was the name that was given to a variety of the Swedish language that started to be spoken in the 1990s in certain urban areas in Sweden, named of course after the kebab, a famous dish from the Middle East, because many of the immigrants
Oh.
coming to these Swedish cities were from the Middle East. And so
This actually is named after a food. This is a different type of kebab. It's like a sandwich from the Middle East. So we're talking about people from the Middle East who immigrated to Sweden and maybe Norway and speak this type of Norwegian language? Maybe?
So the variety of Swedish that they spoke, often influenced by several other languages, was being referred to as kebab Swedish. Much the same is true for kebab norsk, except it's a common misconception that this variety of Norwegian arose simply from immigrants not learning to speak Norwegian properly.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Here in America, there's really only one way to speak English. We don't have different dialects. Like in Norway, depending on where you live, you might speak a slightly different type of Norwegian, a different dialect. I understand that. That's something we don't really have. In America, you really have to learn English one way. If you're not great at it, a lot of people will understand you, but there's really only one correct way. So it's a little confusing to me that people can come into Norway and develop a different way of speaking Norwegian. Maybe it's because in Norway you guys have dialects. You already have different ways of speaking Norwegian. So this just kind of added another one. Maybe that's why it's kind of more acceptable in Norway. I just think this would really never catch on in America. So It's hard for me to relate to this.
As will be demonstrated, because it isn't the case that this Norwegian variety is the result of speakers of one language, for example Arabic, learning to speak Norwegian and then importing their own features from Arabic
Okay.
into Norwegian, a process called interference. So, for
Okay.
example, if you have someone who speaks Spanish as a first language learning to speak English, they may insert an E before many words that start with an S. So, for example, sports may become esports and things like this.
Sure.
However, the
Sure.
case with Kebabnorsk is
Okay.
rather more complicated.
Okay. I understand that. I can understand that. Around the world, people learn English in other countries, and I would just say that people speak English with different accents. And yeah. So, is this when people from the, what they say, Middle East come to Norway and try to speak Norwegian? Well, he's saying it's not that simple.
Because there are many host languages that have influenced Kebabnorsk, as well as Norwegian, of course, being the base. These
Okay.
include, but aren't limited to, Kurdish, Polish, Turkish, Chilean Spanish, Swedish, Arabic, Urdu, and Pashto, as
Wow.
well as several others.
Wow.
One important factor to mention too is that while the majority of immigrants aren't first language English speakers, many English words have also entered the lexicon as a result of popular media,
Oh.
particularly hip hop, film, and as a result of general slang being used throughout Norway.
I mean, maybe this is good for me. Maybe this is good for me as an American. There's more English in Kebabnorsk. Maybe I can understand some of it.
However, Kebabnorsk and Norwegian slang are not quite the same, as we will get into in this video.
Okay.
For this reason, linguists prefer to use the term Norwegian multi-ethnolect. A multi-ethnolect, then, is simply the term that is given to a linguistic style and/or variety that is part of linguistic practices of speakers of more than two different ethnic and, by consequence, linguistic backgrounds,
Okay.
and contains an unusually high number of features from more than one language, but has one clear base language, generally the dominant language of the society where the multi-ethnolect is in use.
So, this is what happens when people travel to Norway and kind of incorporate their native way of speaking into the Norwegian language. So, can all Norwegians understand Kebabnorsk? Or does this create problems where people can't understand each other within Norway?
This definition fits very well what we see with Kebabnorsk, where the main communities where it is spoken are first language speakers of several different languages, including of Norwegian, but it
Okay.
is still clearly identifiable as a form of Norwegian, rather than
Okay.
being something more like a Creole or a Pidgin language, for example. So in practice, what this means is that even though person A may speak as a first language or be within a household from Iraq where they speak Arabic, and person B may be from a household from Pakistan where they speak Urdu or Pashto as a first language, when they come together, they are still able to understand one another when they speak Kebabnorsk, even though one cannot understand the other's first language.
I'm still a bit confused about how this happens. Um, I'm all for, respecting other cultures and incorporating your culture but if you travel to Norway and you live in Norway, shouldn't you just learn like some kind of regular Norwegian? Like just the way that most Norwegians speak. I know around Norway there's a lot of different ways of speaking, a lot of dialects, but why wouldn't you just speak in the way that most Norwegians around you speak? Why would you create a whole new form of Norwegian? It just seems a bit confusing.
It therefore forms a kind of solidifying bond between these immigrant communities of various linguistic backgrounds, which have been influenced by several. But to understand one word that appears in Kebabnorsk, one does not have to understand the entire language that another person has as a background. And so this
Okay.
is a rather modern form of language creation, of dialect creation that we see in these very highly diverse urban environments where there are
Okay.
many, many different linguistic backgrounds at play. If we take a
So I guess the answer is there's so many people who have immigrated to Norway and they all live in the same communities in Norway, in Oslo, that they all talk to each other and kind of develop this sub language of Norwegian within their community in Oslo. And I don't know, that's kind of the best way I can understand it. I guess it makes some sense.
look at a few example words of the special lexical items that we find in Kebabnorsk, of which there are quite a few, we can see that there are several different linguistic features that have come into the language. So, for
Okay.
example, for the verb to see or ser in modern Norwegian, we have sjåfør, which is from Arabic. The word flus is being used for money. Kaaba seems to be quite a well-known one, even by speakers that aren't necessarily speakers of Kebabnorsk but have heard this word. I believe in its original form in Arabic or Berber that it had the meaning of a prostitute, a whore, and was quite derogatory. But I think
What?
now in Kebabnorsk it no longer is particularly derogatory and is just used for women or for girls in general. But
What? So there's just different words. Like in Kebabnorsk and standard Norwegian, there's just different words for it's basically a new dialect. That's the best way I can understand this.
interesting how that has developed over time. The word spa is a word that I came across when I was in Oslo, used quite a bit, especially or even by people that didn't have any kind of migration background. And this simply means good or cool in a way.
Okay.
And we
Okay.
can also see some words that maybe are surprising. So, for example, the word brorsan, which is from Swedish for brother, which is quite different to the
Oh.
standard Norwegian bror. Another
Yeah.
example might be odigga, which means to dig something, to find something cool, which appears to have come through Swedish into Kebabnorsk as well.
I mean, this is just I'm curious if native standard Norwegian speakers, do you have trouble understanding Kebabnorsk? Um, and if you do, couldn't that make a big problem where people can't communicate properly in Oslo? Or am I understanding this correctly? It on one hand, this is really interesting, and it's kind of amazing that a whole new form of language can be created in the modern day. But on the other hand, if you when you keep adding different dialects and different forms of language, it just becomes more and more difficult to communicate with people. It becomes more and more complicated. So this is can be both a good and a bad thing, I think. And we really don't do this in the United States with English. We do have some slang. There are areas of the United States where groups of people speak slightly different, but for the most part, all Americans speak the same exact version of English. So that's why I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around this.
Well, apart from the vocabulary, which is of course a very recognizable feature, it isn't just that we have slang terms. What makes this a language variety or a multi-ethnolect are some of the syntactical and grammatical differences that we see among speakers of this language.
There's different grammar. It's not just different words. That's hard enough. There's different grammar?
First of all, though, it's crucial to recognize too that we have several compound words being formed from various languages, showing that this isn't simply bad Norwegian, but rather people that are playing with language and creating new forms of words by combining several linguistic sources to create new words. One is drittspa, which means something along the lines of very cool. Dritt in Norwegian actually means shit. It's not a good word. But combining it with spa, this Berber word originally that
What?
means cool, it means like shit cool or really cool. So we
Okay. Interesting. So there's just like new compound words and grammar and just being created for this Kebabnorsk. Okay.
So this leads on to an interesting point about Kebabnorsk, is that historically it has been seen as wrong Norwegian or bad Norwegian, Norwegian that has been learned improperly.
I see. So this is kind of controversial by the sound of it. Kebabnorsk, spoken in Oslo, if you're from Norway and you've lived there your whole life, I would understand if you thought, well, this is just like not correct Norwegian. It's like the Norwegian language kind of has been taken and changed and readapted and a different culture incorporated into it. So I understand this point of view where why don't people immigrating to Norway should probably just try to learn correct Norwegian rather than changing it. If I went to any country in the world, I think they would be offended if I took their language and tried to change it. If I go to France, I have to speak correct French. I can't change it to be more English. At least that's my point of view, but I understand it might be a lot more complicated than that. But I can see where this can just be kind of confusing and maybe irritating for Norwegians who have to now try to learn this new form of Norwegian.
And that people who speak Kebabnorsk, often immigrants or people of immigrant background, are incapable of speaking proper Norwegian, and so they speak this Kebabnorsk, which is just bad Norwegian. While there is some truth to this, because this is a multi-ethnolict that has developed from people going from various L1s to L2 Norwegian. And some of these processes are simplifications, as we've seen the immense array of vocabulary that has come in and different grammatical, syntactical practices that we see aren't necessarily simpler than standard Norwegian.
Yeah, it's especially changing the grammar and the language rules. Yeah, it just seems like changing what the Norwegian language is.
Just different to standard Norwegian. This is something that I mentioned in a very different context in my video about the Geordie dialect, which is the dialect that I had most contact with growing up. And I've noticed some similar things with the discussion about Kebabnorsk in Norwegian and Geordie and other dialects around the world that we might see.
Sure.
So Geordie for a long time was considered wrong English. Indeed, when I was at school, this would often be said by various teachers when children did speak in dialect rather than in standard English.
Sure.
But just because dialect speakers might have different forms in dialect doesn't mean that they are incapable of producing the forms in the standard variety of the language. So, for example, if we take a look at...
So he's arguing that people who learn Kebabnorsk could also learn normal Norwegian. If that's the case, why don't they just speak normal Norwegian? I don't know. On the other hand, it's like over time, language evolves and changes. That's inevitable. But I don't know how I feel about this, honestly. And I don't even know if I have an opinion on this because it doesn't really affect me. I just find it confusing. So I think I'm going to stop here. This was a really, really interesting video. Very interesting. It's really about parts of language that I never even think about. And in Norway, it sounds like you guys really do have to consider all of this. And that's really interesting for me to learn about this side of the Norwegian culture. So anyway, if you enjoyed this, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment. If you're Norwegian, I'd love to hear what you think about Kebabnorsk and, people who come to Norway and develop a different way of speaking Norwegian. Do you like that? Do you not like it? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? I'd love to hear what Norwegians have to say about that. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Norway and learning about Norwegian culture, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.